Hello and welcome to the first episode of our Starting a Career in Early Years series. My name is Sinead McMahon and I am the Content Manager here at the Institute of Early Years Education. And in this session, we want to support anyone who is thinking about or considering an early years career to help them to make an informed decision. I am joined today by one of our content writers, Emily Askew, and together we will talk through some of the things you might need to consider at the start of this journey. So to begin with, why might you consider choosing a career with young children? Well, first of all, I would say there needs to be a spark or interest of some fashion. It could be that you recognise that you have a natural flair at being able to connect with young children. Not everybody has the ability to soothe a young baby or to speak in animated tones to toddlers, but if you recognise that these are some of the things that you have the ability to do, then you're probably off to a good start. Now, it might be that you don't recognise either of those abilities in yourself, but you might have a real interest in something more specific, perhaps language acquisition and development, which could lead to something you've learned about in English lessons at school, or perhaps where you have a baby or young child in the family where you've been intrigued by this process as well as other elements of child development, such as the acquisition of some of their physical or independent skills. For me, I would say that I had a real interest in working with children from a very early age. From when I started school myself, I wanted to be a teacher. I fell in love with my class teacher and I wanted to be just like her. So I followed a path where I wanted to be a primary school teacher. However, I never considered working with early years children as such. It wasn't until an experience that I had when I went travelling, I realised that I couldn't teach abroad because I didn't have the right paperwork with me, but I was able to do some supply work for a childcare agency. So I could go and work in kindergartens and work with babies and toddlers. And it opened my eyes completely because whereas I'd never considered that sector of education before, all of a sudden I recognised just how magical and how special it was. And that's kind of how I came to my path. Obviously, again, you might have other interests that you're thinking are making you consider a career with young children. I don't know whether or not, Emily, if you've got any experiences from how you came about considering a career with in the early years.
Yeah, so for me, it was completely the opposite. My parents were both teachers whilst I was growing up, and I was resolute that I would never work in education because my image of working in education was of two primary school teachers working kind of with Key Stage 2 and with children with additional needs. So their experiences were very different to anything that I thought I could experience within the role. But when I was at university in a completely unrelated degree, I picked up a part-time job in an after-school provision. And working with the reception children, it was very much about ingraining the EYFS into our approach. So for me, it was my first experience of any kind of play-based pedagogy, and I instantly fell in love with it. And that's where I kind of, from then on, developed a real interest in that curriculum side of things. And that's how I found my way into working with younger children, which I'd never expected ever.
It's funny, isn't it, how it can just come about, but then somehow you just from
Mm-hmm.
my experience, there's just been no looking back, really. It's sort of, I was lucky I recognised, obviously, everybody has, a completely different path or a completely different way in. But I do think if you are at this point now where if early years or working with young children is on your radar, again, from my own experiences, I would always encourage it. Hey, if it's there on your radar, look further, kind of
Yeah.
follow that path. It still might not be for you, but certainly look more deeply and really carefully consider it.
So, when we're thinking about the opportunities that you might have to work with children within their early years, which roughly we're talking about kind of birth to 7 years, you might be thinking specifically of a nursery setting, you might be thinking of a school provision, but there are actually so many other opportunities that are available to you to get involved with that early years focus across all sorts of sectors of jobs. So yes, you might want to work in nurseries or preschools, maybe it's playgroups or school-based settings. That could be in a variety of roles already, maybe as someone working in a one-to-one position with a child with additional needs. It might be that you're working in a teaching capacity with children kind of a reception age, or it might be that you're working more in a playgroup setting where you're supporting maybe wraparound childcare or something like, as we can see in the photos, an extra provision such as a physical playgroup or an alternative provision for children outside of that kind of standard idea of education and care. It might be that you want to register as a childminder and work as a childminder or a nanny, or as an au pair, travelling around the world and looking after children as you go. These are all really valid and exciting career pathways to take, working with young children, but all have their niches as well that will be down to your personal kind of development and your own interests as to which ones you'd want to pursue more than others. There are some other roles when we're looking outside of that education and childcare kind of provision. For example, in healthcare, you might be looking at a role such as a health play specialist or a health visitor who support children if they are involved in kind of hospital healthcare or in their first kind of stages of life, supporting the whole family as they get to grips with kind of looking after this new child in their lives. You might also be interested in more of the community-based work and working as a family support worker for different families and their contexts, getting to know that family on a really deep and personal level to be able to support them and that child's best start in life. It might be as a community worker, such as working in a family contact centre and supporting from an alternative perspective. Or maybe you might want to set up your own business with an idea that you want to run completely on your own, whether that be kind of supporting a parent and toddler group for a franchise or completely independently, or if you've got any other bright ideas that kind of fill a gap in the market that is ever growing and constantly changing.
Yeah, there's so many, isn't there? You know, I follow lots of different like groups on Facebook and things, and I can always see in locally some new parent and toddler groups that are starting. There was one recently in my local area which was Sensory Play. I think it was a franchise that somebody had bought into, but there's just so many opportunities. And again, I think some of those different opportunities change dependent on where you are in your life yourself, in your life journey. I know that one of my friends started off when she was younger. You're just saying there about some of the roles where you might be involved and like those activities and fun-based activities. One of the girls worked for a holiday company, so they had like the creches and the play groups and stuff that were there. She led those groups, and she ended up then when she came back, that was when she was younger and she had no commitments, but then when she came back and she started to get more commitments, she still used that skill set that she'd acquired and then moved into working in a nursery and then moved to be a teaching assistant in a school. She was still using those skills. Now she's got children herself that kind of fits in for her to work in the school environment in terms of school holidays and things. So I think that just initially, I think it's recognising that there are so many options, and that just by taking that first step, you might start off your journey in a nursery or in a preschool, but it could take you somewhere different. Again, you know, I know I've seen that the government have got a campaign now to teach in further education. So having that skill set, but the idea of being able to teach college students in the future yourself or become a lecturer at university as well. There's just so many things that starting off a career in early years can lend itself to along the way. But we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on through the series. So thinking about what your role might look like, I know we've touched on some of those things there, Emily, but ultimately, you know, we know that those roles will be differently, but there are certain aspects that will overlap in all of those different roles that we've mentioned there. And ultimately, it's the first thing is care. You know, providing safe and caring space for the children that you are working with is crucial. At some point, you will be supporting children to learn in creative ways. You'll be supporting them in many different ways according to the different ages of the children that you're working with, but there will be some element of learning involved. All the way through, you'll be encouraging children's independence, giving them support along the way. And that's quite a difficult thing sometimes to be able to back off. We have to refrain from doing everything from the children to allow them to flourish and to recognise that they are developing themselves independently. So that's a really big, important part of any of those roles. And really adapting to children's individual needs. There are no two children that you will work with that will be exactly the same. Different children will have different learning needs, different physical needs. They will have different preferences, the way they like their food, the way they like to be soothed. All things are different, and it's really important to, again, you know, central to all of those points is building relationships with the children. and also those around us as well, so that we can adapt to those individual needs fully. And again, a big part of that is the important communication between yourself and the children you're working with, their other caregivers, your other colleagues, just to give the children in our care the best possible experiences.
Yeah.
And again, once you do that, I know obviously Emily and I, we both talked there about some of our positive experiences, but there are so many joys of working with young children, too many that we could try and summarise in a short session such as this. But again, talking about those relationships, that's just one of those real magical things of working with children. I'm sure you'll agree, Emily. Child will come to you, you don't know them to begin with, but once you start to recognise that they are starting to trust you, you can move forward to support them. And all those things that we've just talked about, their independence, their learning, once you've got that trust and you've built those relationships, there's something quite magical about that. For me as well, I think when you recognise that the children, again, those things that we've talked about, you're trying to help them to become more independent. Once you see that the children are making some progress towards that independence and they are starting to recognise their own progress as well, I mean, that is just something magical. That is something I would say that from my experiences of starting off as a primary teacher and working with older children and then moving to work with the younger children in early years, it's so apparent, it's so obvious the progress that children make. It's so easy to recognise, more so in other age groups as the children get older. And, that is just so special to know that you have had some input in allowing the children to get to those next steps in their journey. It really is one of the things I would say is one of the biggest joys. Again, I'm sure you've got different things to add there, Emily.
Yeah, so for me, the 0 to 2 age range has always had a really special place in my heart, and that really kind of falls in with that sense of growth, because children at that age, they're growing rapidly all the way through their early years, but particularly in that 0 to 2 age range where you've got children who might be coming to you particularly distressed because of that separation, and by the end of the time in that room with you, they are kind of more distressed when you leave the room. And being able to build that really solid relationship, it's integral to their entire well-being and development later on as well. So that relationship kind of is core to everything else that you do. But also for me, the kind of care-based value in it as well, because a lot of the time we talk about early years education, and yes, that has an amazing place in the work that we do, but it's also about taking note of the importance and the professionalism that comes with the care and nurture of each child that you work with, and really understanding their individual needs, knowing their kind of backgrounds and their contexts, what's important and interesting to them at such a young age, to really kind of build their sense of identity and help them to thrive in that sense too.
Yeah, definitely. Just, there's just so much magic associated with it. And there's always going to be an adventure to go on with the children.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, it does. It requires an energy to do that. But there's so much that the children give back to us. It's not like any other job. And I think ultimately, that you will change lives, and
Yeah.
those children will help to change your life as well. And that idea that there are, just like there are no two children that are exactly the same, like I said earlier, there are never going to be any 2 days that are exactly the same.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an element, you do have to be flexible, but ultimately, that's exciting as well.
Yeah.
There's, you don't know where the day will take you. Sometimes there will be challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. But ultimately, to know, I think that's good. The days go fast, don't they? The days go
Yes.
really fast because you never know how things are going to pan out.
And that's what I
But
look forward to.
yeah, I think another thing as well that's really important to consider is, there is always going to be a demand. People will always need to work with children in childcare capacity and an education capacity. So there is, a strong element of job security as well with any role working with children. So that is another factor to consider, I think, if anybody is considering an early years career. Ultimately, though, like I said, there are some challenges as well that we can't ignore, but just like there are in any other profession as well, every career that you might consider going into, there will be difficulties, there will be challenges, but I think it is important just to map some of those out. One of the things that I touched on before was about the magic of the building the relationships, but equally we have to be mindful that sometimes those relationships are difficult to develop as well. It's not just the relationships with the children, it's the relationships with parents as well and carers. And sometimes we can be in a position where we have to have quite an uncomfortable conversation with a parent or carer. And so that can be difficult for some individuals as well, but something to bear in mind as well. But because we know that that is so important, we have to have those relationships in order to be able to operate, successfully each day. Talked about that idea of the excitement of the day, because we never know how it's going to pan out. But for some individuals, that can actually be quite difficult. If you find it difficult to be flexible and to adapt to the different things going around you, then that's something you need to consider carefully, because it is a requirement for the job. So if you like to know exactly how your day is going to pan out, then perhaps working, it's not to say you might struggle in any capacity with early years. Obviously, we've talked about the many different roles that are available. But in terms of working in a setting on a day-to-day basis, that might be a little bit more challenging for you. But again, many challenges are there. Doesn't mean you can't overcome them, but it's just something to consider. So that I always like to be prepared and be forewarned to know about those things. Again, Emily, I'm sure you can sort of shed some light on some of the other things that we need to consider.
Yeah, I think there has been a lot in the media recently about the workforce within early years and kind of the challenges around recruitment and retainment of staff, which if you were looking at it from that perspective, it's something that's important to consider, and it might well be something that, it's not always seen in a positive light. But the thing I really would take away from it is to read those reports and understand the experiences of people who are in the profession, and they often highlight not only the things that they find challenging, but the reasons why they're still in that career because of all those benefits that we've just talked about and a lot more. The other thing I'd also say with that is that those reports and those investigations are being written for a reason, and that's because there's a huge drive to support the workforce and to make conditions better for those who are working in it. So it's a great time to kind of get involved in the sector that's constantly changing and to really kind of contribute towards making that positive difference for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. I think another aspect that I don't think I fully considered before working in education and working in early years was the amount of legislation to be adhered to and the record keeping and all the administrative tasks. So again, I think it's just being it's not saying that not to go into the role because of that, but just being aware that there are lots of responsibilities and duties that need to be adhered to. And some of those things like record keeping and administrative tasks, it's just being mindful that it isn't, sometimes we do have that misconception. People hear that you work in early years and just literally think, oh, well, you play all day long. Well, yeah, luckily that is one of the things we do get to play with the children quite a lot and to support them in the learning through play. But there are so many other things as well, which again helps to keep the day varied. So you can look at it as you can, if you want, look at it as a challenge or a difficulty, or you can look at it as a way of adding a little bit of extra flavour and variety to your day as well. So, it's just something for individuals to consider. So in terms of the next steps, again, this is only a short little session to sort of try and entice anybody that's even starting to think about considering work in early years that actually, this is a great choice if you are thinking about it. We can't possibly cram in all of the details into this session, but there are some websites that can help you. At the moment, the government in England are running a big early years campaign, Do Something Big, and they've got lots of supporting resources for different people at different stages on their journey as well. So the QR code is there, so do pause, take a screenshot and go onto their website to have a little look to find out more about different qualifications that you can look into, etc. And also we have similar resources available in Wales to support our colleagues in Wales and also in Scotland as well. And over the course of the remainder of this series, we will tap into looking into more information about the different qualifications, the different routes that you might choose to take. So do look out for those forthcoming episodes that will be coming soon. Before I finish off though, I'm just going to pass to Emily, who's going to share some more about the resources that we have on the Institute of Early Years Education website.
Yep, so if you head over to the Institute website, whether you're a member or not, there are a huge range of resources that are both open access and more exclusive for those with membership. So do consider joining us to gain access to all of those different resources. The careers pathway aspect of the Institute is designed exclusively for your professional development. So where we look at in our member resources about the work that you can do to develop your own conduct with children, the career pathways is more about getting the most out of your career opportunities. And that includes people just like you watching today who might be considering a career in early years, but not yet be involved in working in the sector at all. I've just put on here, if you've not seen before, we've got some of our career pathway resources that are useful regardless of what you're thinking about. They are tailored to working in early years, but there are lots of different ways in which you can use these resources, looking at job descriptions and interview techniques, how to write a CV, and all sorts of soft skills that you can develop to really make the most of your recruitment opportunities. On the other side here on the left, we've also got some of our blogs that really highlight the reasons behind why you might want to join us in the early years sector.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you so much for joining me today. I do hope you found this helpful, and hopefully we've enticed you to look a little bit further and explore working in the early years a little bit more in a bit more detail. Do, like Emily says, tap into our resources on the website, and do keep your eyes peeled for the next episode in this series. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.